Welcome to the second in a program of a series of celebrations that we're holding here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the historic reopening of the 15 new galleries of the Arab lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia. Tonight's program is titled Women in the Muslim World, Patrons, Artists, Muses, and Instigators. For the program, we brought together a panel of exceptional women who represent North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. They're going to share their perspectives and personal stories with all of us, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot of wonderful new things about them and their journey. A couple of points before we get underway. While our topic of discussion is focused on art and culture, I wanted to share some perspectives on the position of women as a whole and Muslim women within that context. Women have had a long, hard journey surviving in the patriarchal world because they've had to adapt to the constraints that have been put around them. Islam, which was born in the 7th century, as many of you know, was actually a reformist movement, and the Prophet Muhammad was known for really elevating the position of women in the region at that time. In fact, and some of you may know this, he married a businesswoman who was several years older than himself. So he actually led by example. And he said, assuredly, women are the twin halves of men. Muslim women, like their Western counterparts, have had a series of struggles, and I think what's most readily apparent is in the way in which women in the world got the right to vote. In doing some research about that, I found that New Zealand was the first to give women the right to vote in 1893. They were followed by Azerbaijan in Central Asia, and then the US and Turkey in the 20s and 30s. In the 40s and 50s, many of the Arab countries gave women the right to vote. Switzerland, on the other hand, gave women the right to vote in 1971. And in fact, it wasn't until 1990 that Switzerland ratified its laws so that women could vote fully also in the cantons, the member states. So there was still some inequality. I found that very interesting. And so it goes with art and culture initiatives. Our panelists emanate from traditional societies. They've created a unique position for themselves and a really remarkable way in which they express themselves. I'm delighted that our panel is going to be moderated by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Caryle Murphy. She's a longtime reporter for the Washington Post and currently is a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. While at the Post, she covered both domestic and international affairs, and twice was a foreign correspondent, first in South Africa and later in Cairo. Her beat included most of the Arab world there, and in 2005 she spent 3 months in Baghdad covering the US occupation of Iraq. In 2006, Ms. Murphy left the Post and relocated to the Middle East. She recently returned after a 3-year tour in Saudi Arabia, where she worked as an independent. She reported as a freelance journalist for the Global Post, for the Christian Science Monitor, and the National, a newspaper in Abu Dhabi. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting and the George Polk Award for Foreign Reporting for her coverage from inside Kuwait during Iraq's 1990 occupation of the Emirate and the subsequent Persian Gulf War. So now please join me in welcoming our panelists and our moderator, Caryle Murphy.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Met. We're going to have a conversation, and I hope at the end of that there'll be some time for questions. And I think there's supposed to be some microphones set up in the aisles, so I'd ask you when it comes question time to go there and pose your question. And then as a final favor, we'd like you to fill out the survey to help the education department of the museum know what you'd like to see more of. Well, tonight we're here to talk about a vast subject, which is women and the Muslim world. And we are fortunate to do so against the backdrop of this fabulous museum and its magnificent new galleries, displaying an amazing diversity of artistic and creative work from Islamic cultures. But we're doubly fortunate tonight because we're honored to have with us 4 very intelligent, accomplished Muslim women whom I would like to introduce to you now. Loula Essaydi, who is seated beside me, is a Moroccan-born artist whose work has been exhibited around the world in places as disparate as upstate New York, Abu Dhabi, Texas, Ireland, Dubai, Morocco, and France. Her works are included in collections of 50 institutions, notably the Louvre, the British National Museum, Harvard University Art Museum, the Rhode Island School of Design Museum of Art, and the Fries Museum in Holland, to name a few. She works in numerous media, including painting, video, film, installation, and photography. Her art often combines Islamic calligraphy with representations of the female body as a way of addressing the complex reality of the Arab female identity, which I hope she'll tell us more about tonight. Often she returns in her work to her Moroccan childhood, exploring it at a distance for new truths. She grew up in Morocco and in 2003 received her Master's of Fine Arts from Tufts University's School of the Museum of Fine Arts. In my art, I wish to present myself through multiple lenses as artist, Moroccan, traditionalist, liberal, Muslim. In short, she says, I invite viewers to resist stereotypes. Seated 3 ladies away from me is Samina Qureshi. She's an artist, a designer, and an author. Currently, she's associate visiting artist at the Peabody Museum of Harvard University, where she's preparing a new exhibit and multimedia project entitled The Other Half of Tomorrow, Women Changing Pakistan. She did grow up in Pakistan and holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Kansas City Art Institute and a Master's of Fine Arts from Yale. Her work, which uses a wide variety of different media, has been exhibited in galleries in Pakistan, London, New York, Washington, and Kansas City. And her passion goes outside the museum and the galleries because she's very concerned with the vital connection between art, spirituality, and community. And she stressed this when she was given a joint appointment by the Schools of Medicine and Architecture at the University of Miami. And there she worked with university officials and community leaders from inner city Miami neighborhoods to strengthen the community and promote ethnic and economic diversity. From 1994 to 1997, she served as Director of Design at the National Endowment for the Arts, a period during which she was called upon to defend the endowment's work. Her book, Sacred Spaces, A Journey with the Sufis of the Indus, explores this link between culture and community. She now lives in Massachusetts. Sabiha Al Khemir, who is seated 2 ladies away from me, is a Tunisian-born historian of Islamic art, as well as an author and an artist in her own right. She was the founding director of the very fabulous Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar, from 2003 to 2008, where she had the all-important role of developing the museum's artistic vision. In 2006, she curated and wrote the catalog for the Louvre's exhibit entitled From Cordoba to Samarkand, Masterpieces from the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. Ms. Al Khemir was educated first in Tunis, where she obtained a degree in English literature, then in London, where she received a master's degree in Islamic art and archaeology from London University School of Oriental and African Studies. 4 years later, she received her doctorate from the same institution. Ms. Al Khemir was a consultant for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1991 for the exhibition Al-Andalus, Islamic Arts of Spain. She's also written a major work on figurative Islamic art and produced 2 documentaries for Britain's Channel 4. And last but not least, she writes fiction. Her second novel, The Blue Manuscript, which came out in 2008, is about an archaeological dig in Egypt searching for the magnificent Blue Quran. It's a story that moves between the 10th century and Egypt of the 1980s. She's now living in New York, where she's putting together an upcoming exhibition entitled Beauty and Belief, Crossing the Bridges with the Arts of Islamic Culture, that is being organized by the Brigham Young University Museum of Art. And last but not least, the lady at the far end is Her Royal Highness Princess Firyal of Jordan, who has been a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador since 1992, and in 1995 she was appointed Special Advisor to the UNESCO's Director General. Born in Jerusalem, her father was a prominent political leader. Her mother was chairwoman of the Red Crescent Society in the West Bank. She was educated in Jordan and Beirut. She married His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed of Jordan, the younger brother of the late King Hussein of Jordan, with whom she had 2 children, one of whom, Prince Ghazi, is active in promoting interfaith relations. Princess Firyal serves on the boards of many institutions that are pillars of our country's educational, artistic, and philanthropic life, including the Dean's Council of Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, the International Council at Columbia University, and the International Rescue Committee for Refugees. She also is a trustee of the New York Public Library and sits on the International Council of the Tate Modern in London, as well as the President's Council at the Museum of Modern Art. In May 2007, she was appointed a minister plenipotentiary by the government of Jordan with ambassadorial rank. Her work with UNESCO has included launching the International Hope Foundation for Street Children in 1994 to serve homeless and street children in New York and elsewhere. In 1999, she obtained a degree in American history from Columbia University, and she's now pursuing her doctorate in comparative religion at Columbia. So there you have our distinguished panel. And tonight, to start tonight's conversation, I'd like to share some personal reflections on the title of this event. And this reflection comes out of my personal experience living in the Middle East, where I first learned about Islam, met many Muslims, and started learning about Islamic history. I came to know quite quickly that women in the Muslim world are very strong characters, very strong individuals. They've contributed very much to the societies in which they live and are truly the backbones of these societies, although their contributions have not always been acknowledged or given the accolades that they deserve. And it did occur to me that we might regard Prophet Muhammad as the first Islamic feminist because of the new social order he created that gave females more rights and freedoms than they had previously had. Female infanticide, which was very prevalent before Islam, was banned. Prophet Muhammad also put mothers on a pedestal, telling a questioner 3 times, "Your mother," when the questioner asked whom he should be most respectful to on earth. And throughout the ages, Muslim women have given us examples of the 4 categories we're going to talk about tonight. I think, first of all, about Khadijah, the Prophet's first wife, a successful businesswoman. She could perhaps be a role model for an Islamic female patron because of her strong support of her husband when he's receiving the Quranic verses. His other wife, Aisha, was an early transmitter of the Quranic verses in the oral tradition and kept alive this very important oral tradition which became Islam's sacred scripture. Sukaina al-Hussein, who lived in what is today Saudi Arabia, is said to have hosted a literary salon where visitors would recite poetry for their hostess. Later, women played a vital role in creating Islam's mystical tradition. I think of Rabia al-Adawiyya, who lived in southern Iraq. She was a famous Sufi mystic, and some writers credit her with introducing the concept of pure love into the mystic tradition. As for muses, well, in that category, I'm going to put all Muslim grandmothers, because I heard so many Muslims tell me how much they learned from their grandmothers, including their prayers and their manners. And in contemporary times, we've had so many examples of female Muslim instigators. I think first of Shireen Ebadi of Iran, a lawyer and human rights activist who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003. And this year, we've seen Muslims all over the Arab world, from Bahrain to Tunisia, instigating the fight for democratic societies. And one of these instigators was the recipient of this year's Nobel Peace Prize, the Yemeni democratic activist Tawakkul Karman. Now, to start off the conversation with my panel, I'd like each of our panelists to tell us one by one which of the 4 types of Muslim women they most identify with and why, and then to tell us a little bit about their life. And I'm going to call first on Sabiha Al Khemir, our art historian. Sabiha.
Is this working?
Yes.
It is. Thank you first for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. To answer your question, would I get disqualified if I say I don't identify with any of these categories?
No, but you have to tell us why.
Okay, that's fair. For me, it's been a journey, and it's not a linear journey. And the steps have been through projects. I would say each project is a step in a hopefully coherent journey, driven by, this east and west bridging, driven through my personal journey in relation to the material I'm dealing with. And the project is a form. I would say, whether it is fiction, whether it is art history, whether it is drawing, it's really a form driven by that force. And so to take just examples of what you kindly mentioned, the Blue Manuscript, which is a work of fiction, is related to Islamic art, is related to a manuscript, an old manuscript from the 10th century. So its initial journey starts with the discovery of an Islamic art piece, but it takes off to explore a world, of fiction that is not necessarily related to facts, but it is a journey of exploration of truth, and what better format but fiction. So in that sense, another example, the Doha experience, to be involved in the, building, the architecture, and I don't mean just the bricks and mortar, but the architecture of the identity of the museum, which is really for me the driving force was that bridging of the creation of a platform for a dialogue, you know, between East and West, but actually between, within, among ourselves, within, you know, the immediate, basically even the interaction, the dialogue within the objects themselves. And for me to see each object as a door to a whole world. And then, having started my own journey, you know, being born in Tunisia, etc., but going through from Quranic school up to London University, and again, it's not linear because the modernity of the Muslim world is very clear in, you know, say, 10th century material. It is there. There is a timeless modernity. And that timeless modernity has been a very inspiring, you know, source. And so connecting this kind of project, because every project is a step in this journey, the project I'm involved in now, and I prefer to talk about the present because the minute the project is finished, it's no longer yours. The current project, which is called Beauty and Belief, this exhibition, Beauty and Belief, Crossing Bridges with the arts of the Islamic culture, starts in Utah. First, why America? Because I would love to give something beautiful from the Muslim world to America. So I was driven by that from the beginning. And then the project, which is a major exhibition bringing over 250 objects from all over the world, Islamic art from the 7th century touching to the present day, starting in Utah, where somebody said to me in an answer to borrowing an object in Europe, but there is no Islamic art in Utah. I said, precisely. I would like to take Islamic art to Utah. And from Utah, from the Mormon community, it goes to Indianapolis Museum of Art, it goes to Portland, it comes to Newark. So it literally goes from water to water, crossing from west to east. And so that journey for me, which is really the driving force about bridging, etc., is a journey of communicating, outside the box, but also communicating something that is timeless and that is very, very much from the Islamic world, but that is also universal.
So you would like to add a fifth category. You would like to add communicator. That's fine.
That's for others to label.
Okay, well, let's move on to Loula Essaydi. And Loula has some visuals to show you in her talk. I think it's on.
Thank you. Is it working?
Yes.
First, I would like to begin by saying that it is an honor for me to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I would like to single out a special comment. Of course, I identify as an artist, the category. I would like to single out for special comment, not an object, as you suggested, not even a space, but instead a dialogue between spaces. I am fascinated by the intersection between the Islamic galleries and the 19th century Orientalist painting exhibit next door, because this interactive dynamic is directly, in fact, crucially related to my own life and my work. I am a visual artist and a woman from Morocco and the Middle East, now living primarily in the West, but traveling frequently in the Arab world. As such, I have become deeply aware of how these cultures view one another, in particular of the impact of the Western gaze on Arab culture. Although Orientalism most often suggests the 19th century European vision of the East as a set of assumptions, it lives on today, both in the terms of the Western gaze and in the way Arab societies continue to internalize and respond to that gaze. Because in its early form, Orientalism was a literal vision, finding expression in the work of Western painters who traveled to the exotic East in search of cultures more colorful than their own, I have used it as a point of departure in much of my work, painting and photography both. The imagery I found in Orientalist painting has resonated with me in complex and even contradictory ways, ultimately helped me situate my own experience in powerful visual language. As I have said, my relation to the Orientalist tradition is a complicated one. I'm able to appreciate the beauty Western painters found in Morocco, Egypt, and other Arab countries, which they rendered in such loving detail. And at the same time, I cringe at the distorted and degrading view of the Eastern way of life as portrayed in their work, and most strikingly in their presentation of Arab women. I can simultaneously regret how their demeaning imagery imprinted itself on the societies depicted, and at the same time believe that we all bear the responsibility of freeing ourselves from imposed identities.
Can you talk a little bit about your work that's presented here?
This slide was, it's in an old palace in Morocco, and it's in a courtyard of the harem area. So my work is, it's influenced and inspired by Orientalist paintings and the fascination with the harem, the odalisque, and the veil. Okay. So all my work is a triptych, and the harem.
It seems that you often portray women in matching their background, so there's no depth to them. Is that on purpose?
It is in purpose because, as I was explaining, this two slides are from this courtyard and from the third part of the triptych, which is called harem. And the word harem refers to the space, but it also refers to the woman. And I'm interested in the line between woman as a space, woman as a woman. Mm-hmm. And also the word harem comes from the Arabic word haram, which means sin. Mm-hmm. So this is in that courtyard.
And what made you why do you use the odalisque figure?
It's because I'm using the same tropes that the Orientalists are using in their paintings to exaggerate these poses mm-hmm. and make them visible. Mm-hmm. This is a harem that is not the same harem as in the Orientalist painting. I was born in one, and my harem is different than what you see in this painting. So it is a male fantasy, and that's what I'm trying to expose.
Interesting. And here we have some more that you've...
Yes, here you can see actually this is from the series Les Femmes du Maroc, and the title is based on Les Femmes d'Alger by Delacroix. This is Ingres, the Grande Odalisque. And in this body of work, what I did is actually to cover the walls. The place where these photos were shot are actually as colorful as the same one with the courtyard. And so what I do is I cover the wall completely with white cloth, and I write on it and I write on the women before I take the picture.
That must take hours.
It takes months of preparations. And sometimes it takes up to 6 months of writing.
And do you decide what to write ahead of time, or you just write what comes into your head?
Well, I start with a specific text that is based on my own private life, but then there is a dialogue going with the models. I don't like to call them models because they really participate in the project. It's a collaboration. And so I respond to what's happening around me, and it's my journal, it's my story and the story of these women.
So you definitely identify with the category of artist.
Definitely.
Okay, well, let's move on to Samina Al Qureshi. Samina, did you identify in particular with one of these categories?
Well, you know, I am an artist and a designer, and I have spent my life trying to acquire the disciplines that go with trying to express what I feel and use the power of the medium to harness it to communicate images and realities that are actually important in building the bridges that Sabiha was talking about earlier. However, I lapse into my true nature of instigator from time to time. And I had to be one to survive a family of 8 brothers, 3 mothers, 10 servants. It was a cacophony. And to be heard, you had to be very inventive. And I thought the picture spoke louder than words. So I was able to get the attention, particularly of my father, which everyone was vying for, through this. If I wanted to communicate as a young child, I would draw a picture and leave it under his pillow or in prominently displayed in some place which would either be embarrassing or need some response right away. So I never had to wait, and I realized then the power of the pen. So I have to say that I wander between those two things, but to share with you the idea that after having lived in 2 countries, Pakistan and the United States, after September 11th, I became transformed by the need to communicate that all sizes were not equal, that everything was not monolithic in Islam, and that there is a diversity and plurality that needed to be acknowledged so that these stereotypical images that the media was feeding to everybody could be countered in some way. And as a maker of marks, and it seemed incumbent on me to do that. And I had gone on a journey to really investigate. I was interested in my name, which is Qureshi, which identifies with the tribe that the Prophet Muhammad comes from. And I do believe it's a folk tale, you know, for a family in the northern India and then Pakistan to be identified with that august lineage was for me a little bit difficult, but I decided that I would believe that because it was the path of least resistance. And also, the family were traditionally involved with the Sufi shrine of a Chishti Sufi in Ajmer, which is in Rajasthan. So at the time of all this, having been raised by Catholic nuns in the St. Joseph's Convent in Karachi, I decided that I needed to investigate the Sufi way, and I went off on a journey to find out the inspiration and the spiritual qualities that informed this vast network. Because of the millions of Muslims that live in our region, 3/4 of them owe an allegiance to some Sufi shrine, or to us. And that is not to say that the shrine is important. That is a symbol of the teacher who lived there. And as Sufis, traveled all around, they left the familiar. They came from places of Chisht and Iran. Lots of things that you can see in the the geographical span of their richly rewarding lives. Anyway,
Samina, did
I want to show you that.
Yeah.
So
this is some of your work.
Yes.
Was it inspired by Sufism?
The central word is hu, which is one of these sacred things, and it's a combination of architectural and other sacred geometries. You can go on.
Okay.
I think you just go through them quickly, and you'll just see that this is what these mixed media images really combine calligraphy and the art of the miniature, as well as modern photography, to layer the images and to take you into a different reality.
Okay. Well, thank you. And Your Highness, Princess Firyal, what category do you identify with? I think it's on.
Okay. Well, actually none, and three of them, little bit. I certainly am not an artist among this very learned panel here, but I am deeply appreciative of all forms of art. I really think that I was humbled today, and when we sat behind there, to see and know for the first time, first of all, Miss Murphy. It's really humbling what she's done in my part of the world. And then the three colleagues here, their accomplishments, their drive, their vision. I have no words of wisdom to add, nor a new insight into Islam and the religion. For me, the religion I grew in, which is in Jordan, the Muslim world, of course, and Christian world at the same time, was more a convention and a tradition than an actual religion. There was no division between certain things. When I grew up, it was no division between Christians and Muslims. I grew up in a Protestant school, like you did with the nuns. And so for me, this was a great melange, great mixture between the cultures, the religions, and I only became aware of although I come from a very traditional family, but there was not divisiveness there. Our neighbors were Christians, my parents were Muslims, and are, and were, and I am. We went to visit them and take them presents for Christmas. They came to us during our feasts, Eids. And so I didn't really recognize the difference. I thought this is more occasions to celebrate, more gifts, more sweets, more things to have. So for me, religion was folklore. I was really, really never aware of the divisive nature of the religion until I started traveling in the West, and I spent some time in school in London, and then later on here and everywhere. And then I started to realize that it falls upon us, the people like me who grew up in that climate, to explain to the world that this is not how we know it. We know it as a religion of cleanliness, because I remember very well that people who pray have to wash 5 times, but we as children were told to wash 5 times. So that is already an accomplishment, to get for children to wash 5 times. So these are the little things I remember as a child from my religion. But I also remember that I knew every carol, Christmas carol, and I was fighting my friends at school. I was in boarding school for the Sunday sermon that I should carry the bucket and go and collect the money from the things, and we put on our fineries and the best dressed, at the age of 7, 8, 9 years old. So I had really a very unusual, upbringing in that sense. But Jordan and the West Bank were one country then, and this was unusual. This was not what you hear about and what you read today, because next to every mosque there was a church. Next to every Muslim house, there was a Christian house. And not just one Protestants, Catholics, Latins, Orthodox. As you know, I went to school in Jerusalem. So I remember King Hussein said he spends a great amount of time sorting out the feud because of the cemeteries. You had to divide the land and the cemeteries for which sect, including the Islams in Jerusalem. So there was always this issue, but it was friendly and done really in a good spirit. So when I started coming more often here, and I suddenly find myself in a position of being a defender of the faith. Now, I'm not a learned person. I didn't study Islam. I lived it and I felt it. And only I can speak today from the life I had. I really have no words of deep knowledge. But I think the life I led, it is indicative of how we treated Islam. It is not what was written about or said about in later years. Maybe all what was said about or written about was justified by uncertain and unfortunate events. But if you grew up like I did, adoring Elvis Presley and the Beatles and during the miniskirt and all of that, you would not think it's this Muslim country that you would see today. For instance, I have never seen a head scarf when I was growing up. It didn't exist then in that time in Jerusalem or in the part I lived. It didn't. Even my grandmother would put it on her head when she prayed, but not in daily life. So this was, for us, new, like it is new for you. And of course, this is not the subject of today while we're here, but I must say one thing which struck me as very, very important today when I was coming in. I saw the word the Arab land in the same sentence as art. Now, that's an unusual term because the bulk of our art is Islamic art. It was never identified with the word Arab because pre-Islam, the art that was left to us, it was intangible, meaning poetry and words, but never anything it got passed on along to us visible that you can see. So it's called intangible heritage. To see it today outside the Met, this amazing institution, let's say Arab land, which it really gave me a fantastic good feeling that now Islamic art is identified with the land it was in, and of course, the biggest part of the Islamic art is in the Arab world. So there is a little fine line here. I want to say that as proud as I am of my Arab heritage, we are not exactly have a great tradition in art except since Islam. So Islam brought to us, as you all know, you can see it here and everywhere, a sense of creativity that it did not exist before.
And I think that that's one of the lessons we can see in this fabulous new collection of 15 galleries, the diversity, and yet there's a common thread between it all, which goes back to the heritage and the religion of Islam. And I'd like to move the conversation back to the galleries a bit. Recently, in the New York Times, Holland Cotter wrote about this opening, the reopening and the restoration of the galleries, and he said that close-up detail is the real story of the art of the Islamic world. It is overall an art of intimacy and about one-on-one encounters with individual objects. So now I'm going to ask our four panelists to tell us one object that's on display in the new galleries that they particularly liked and why. And we're going to start with Loula Essaydi because her choice is the first one in the slideshow. That's still Samina's work, and that's more of Samina's work. Likewise, this is still Samina's.
Oh dear, it got stuck.
It got stuck?
No. I'm just
Okay. So, why did you pick this?
I must confess I have a fondness for these Moroccan courtyards because it reminds me of my home. It's made up of several courtyards, albeit somewhat larger. But I think also it's, for me, what the Met did is achieve here is totally in keeping with the practice of Moroccan families like mine, that is creating a contemporary space whose character, in every respect, places it in a seamless continuity with ancient Islamic architecture. The architectural tradition is alive and well in Morocco, and artisans as gifted as times past. This is a beautiful, wrought, sophisticated space that looks as it existed for many centuries.
And what was the function of the courtyard?
The courtyard is actually the inside, and you have the rooms from where you can see where there is the door. You'll have rooms for all the four parts, and that would be the living rooms and the guests and the more. And usually the house would be made of several courtyards. You will have one for the guests, the women's quarter, the children, and the bedrooms will be in the mezzanine.
And would they be open to the sky?
Some of them, they used to be open, but nowadays they found ways of actually putting like domes in glass or something during winter because of the openness. And usually they are much bigger than this, and they have indoors gardens.
And a fountain was always a centerpiece?
Always. The water was very important. It's part of, because inside the courtyards is the garden, and the garden always there is water.
Okay.
And but this courtyard is really, it's very small. It would be like an entrance, or that leads you into more of other spaces, you know, from corridors, and one riad will take you to the other. The quarter is really called riad. And that's what really attracted me. And also it's, I know that I'm going to be spending a lot of time in there when I'm homesick from Morocco. It brings me, it's just fascinating for me to see that they managed to build something that is so seamless with the ancient architecture and with the collection.
And it was built by Moroccans.
Yes, I know. I know.
So, Samina, I think you've chosen two
I've chosen two objects. This is from North Africa, and it's the Blue Quran, and it's dyed with indigo. And the greatest crops of indigo come from Sindh, which is my home province. It's especially unusually beautiful, deep blue, which is celestial. It is symbolic of infinity and the heavens, and there are no spaces in those lines. I just want to mention that it's difficult to read because the calligrapher has taken it upon himself to eliminate all the spaces that lead from one line to the other.
Are you able to read a couple of sentences?
And yeah, it's a blessing, and you know, you can see the alif throughout, you know, the vertical letter, and if you just look at it as a piece of design, the alignments of that is a special combination of piety and aesthetics. It's really an important piece to me, and it resonates with what I try to do in my work.
And of course, this is the subject of your novel, correct?
And Sabiha should bring her wonderful exhibition to Sindh, to Karachi, because of her book, which is about indigo and blue.
Now, why it's called the Blue Quran? Because every page was blue? Is that correct?
Because
microphone.
It's called the Blue Quran. It acquired its name in the West. It was never called the Blue Quran at home. If home is where home is. It had more attention here, so where is home? It's called the Blue Quran because it's the only Quran, the pages of which are dyed blue, indigo. And so it's the Blue Quran. But in fact, what's very interesting and what touched me originally and inspired me to write the novel is that its pages are all over the world. But on top of that, it's not signed. Nobody knows who did it. And more than that, now, for Arabic, as you probably know, diacritical marks are very important because they,
Those are the little marks that show us where the vowels are.
That's right. And so this manuscript hasn't got any diacritical marks. So partly because the Quran is supposed to be in the heart of the believer, and you are recognizing rather than reading. So there is a mirror quality there. And so imagine with no diacritical marks, this is no longer sound per se. It is image. And in a sense, the combination of dark blue, which is connected to somehow the quality of the night, and then the presence of gold, which in manuscript illumination is equivalent to light. The Quran itself speaks of itself as light. So it's this light on deep blue indigo with no diacritical marks, which takes the language beyond its primary communicative tool as a way of just speaking, which means it really transcends to silence.
Interesting.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Therefore, it's universal. It's yours.
You got it. Great. Okay, but Samina had a second.
I'm never going anywhere without Sabiha.
But you brought the Blue Quran. I didn't bring it.
Okay.
So the next piece is from the Assembly of the Birds, a Sufi poem which is, by Fariduddin Attar. And it's the most incredible thing about a hoopoe, an ordinary bird that is leading a whole flock of birds through 7 valleys, many trials and tribulations to really seek the Simurgh, which is the mythical king of the birds. And the story in the installation in the gallery is more than one image from this folio, but these are so beautifully rendered, and it's in many ways a vision of paradise, And Sabiha again can tell us more, but you will see that the tops of all foliage and the trees or whatever are bent. They're never vertical because they are bent in deference to Allah. Yes?
Yeah. Well, Mantaq al-Tayr, which was written in the 13th century by Fariduddin Attar, Attar, as the Arabic word says, is the perfumer. He had a wonderful shop. And then one day comes a beggar, and he says, give me this, give me this. Go away, go away. So, the beggar looked at him and said, you're trapped with all these material things in your perfume shop. I have nothing to lose. I can die anytime. And he lay down and died, just like that. He was ready because he was on a quest all his life for truth. He was ready, he could go anytime. Attar was so shocked, he closed his shop. He was no longer a perfumer. He set off on a journey, and after a long time, he wrote The Conference of the Birds, Mantaq al-Tayr. This is an illustration of Mantaq al-Tayr. There were many illustrations. But what's interesting about the story, very interesting, is that this long journey of quest, which leads to the Simurgh, as she said, the king of the birds, or the equivalent of God for the birds, when they arrive, after having started, after the story starts with everyone boasting, the peacock saying, I can't go on a long journey, I might lose my beautiful feathers on the way, etc. But they arrive, and at the end, having lost their feathers, peacock and partridge and God knows what, they looked all the same. None of them had any feathers. Worse than that, after this very long journey of 7 valleys, and they arrive at the court of the Simurgh, and they look, there were 33 birds of them. What do you think they saw? 33 birds reflected in the Simurgh, because the Creator is inside you. That's what Islamic culture says.
Thank you for that lovely story. Now, Sabiha, you've chosen this. You were particularly touched by this?
I'm glad I didn't choose the Blue Quran.
We are too.
I chose this because simply it is the piece that brought me to New York. I was 23 years old, and I was on a quest for wood carvings. Why wood carvings? Simply because I was working on my PhD thesis at the time, and it was part of the thesis, part of the research was these wood carvings that once upon a time decorated a palace in Cairo, and they were now in different collections. This palace, called the Western Palace, guess why? Because it was opposite the Eastern Palace. And so there were two palaces in Cairo, the Eastern Palace, which was the seat of the Caliphate, and the Western Palace, which is opposite. And the space in between, guess what it was called? Between the two palaces. I'm not joking, it's true. I'm not making it up.
Very Egyptian.
Yeah. It's actually the title of one of the trilogy books by Naguib Mahfouz, the Nobel Prize. Yeah, so Bain al-Qasrain, between the two palaces, was this square between the two palaces. Now, the Western Palace, which was a smaller palace, belonged to a lady called Sitt al-Mulk, Lady of the Kingdom. She was the daughter of Al-Aziz Billah, and we're talking 10th century. Now, through research, I found that at the time that I discovered, believe me, it was a coincidence. I thought I was researching on material from Egypt, but Sitt al-Mulk, if you think that Cairo was founded in 969 AD, Al-Mu'izz li-Din Allah al-Fatimi, who entered from Tunisia, the Fatimids dynasty had started in 901 in Tunisia, they entered Cairo, the founding of Cairo in 969, Al-Mu'izz enters 2 years later with his caravan, with his ancestors, literally, he took his ancestors to Cairo. Among those people was Sitt al-Mulk, 3 years old. She was Tunisian. So the palace, which had all these wood carvings, and led me on the research to New York, to the Metropolitan Museum, to see this panel. The other panel is in the Museum of Islamic Art, Cairo. Now, these two identical panels, if you can imagine, they were part of a door. That door was in the palace, within the reception hall or whatever. And I was fascinated by the idea of figurative representation, because there is a general belief among Muslims and non-Muslims that Islamic art is void of figurative representation, which is a misconception. So at the time, I was working on figurative representation, and linked to this are wainscots. There are many panels, friezes that would have run all around the walls, decorated by extensive figurative representation of dancers, musicians,
And what do we have here?
So what we have
horses?
here, 2 horses, but what's fascinating is that the figurative is completely amalgamated in the arabesque. It is completely integrated, and there is no separation between figurative and pattern. And there is one visual language. And so the idea also, I wanted to say something about Sitt al-Mulk, that Sitt al-Mulk actually ruled in Egypt in regency role because her nephew was too young at the time, Az-Zahir. And so she was also quite an extraordinary woman because she was actually the person who saved the dynasty at the time and held the country together.
The Fatimid dynasty?
Yes, the Fatimid dynasty, which takes its name, obviously, from, after the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, Fatima. And so to get back to the panel, for me, the Met has got so many wonderful pieces. It's one of the best collections in the world, obviously, and it's not about choosing an object here for me that was touching me. But this panel from a door is just a little reminder that every object is really a door through which we can actually see, imagine people behind it, imagine a life, imagine Islamic culture, imagine a whole reality, because every single piece in those Islamic galleries, in the Met or somewhere else, or in Beauty and Belief that will go around, from 2012, every piece, is a witness, which makes you a witness. So that's how Islamic art.
And every piece was created by a person.
Absolutely.
Or persons.
Absolutely. And the other reason why I chose this piece is because wood carving as a craft and as a tradition in Egypt was held by the Copts, really.
The Christians of Egypt.
Absolutely, the Christians of Egypt. And when Islam arrived in Egypt in the 7th century, it didn't bring its own tradition of wood carving. It continued the tradition by the Christians, and Christians and Muslims were producing very similar wood carvings at the time. In fact, research in places as far as Wadi Natrun, the deserts, the monasteries, you know, in Wadi Natrun, in Egypt, in the desert of Egypt, on the way to Alexandria, you find in the rooms of the monks wood carvings that are extremely similar to doors in the Mosque of Al-Hakim and the Mosque of, you know. So it's like these communities and their visual expression.
They influenced each other.
It's completely interconnected. It's completely
that
the
was
same fabric.
Early globalization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the object really speaks for that interconnectedness, and to finish, as visually as you see the interconnectedness, because you can't see where the line really starts in this pattern and where it ends in this particular panel. Mm-hmm. And to show that everything but everything is interconnected. Mm-hmm. And that is at the end of the day.
I've never heard anyone get as much as that out of a wood panel.
You would be amazed.
Really, isn't it? Your Highness, you chose the Damascus Room. This is a real room, been transported here, and believe me, there are rooms like this today in Syria. It's just beautiful. Would you tell us why you felt particularly strongly about this room?
First, how can I follow with this panel, huh? What did I tell you? Really. You know, for me, art also is how we live. I mean, it's not just artifact. You look at it and sometimes you don't even see it. It's on your walls and it's living. For me, living art is really very important. When I grew up, my mother had a kind of liking to European furniture and French in particular. And I always thought, hey, when I have a house of my own, when I have my own way, I'm going to have a very typical Middle Eastern art. Well, the nearest thing to that in Jordan would be Damascus. And so I embarked on having a room very, very similar to this. I have photographs. I wish I brought them. In fact, we bought the boiserie, you know, the wood from Damascus. We actually dismantled some of the walls. They were selling them then. And the stained glass and everything. And I really built a room very similar to this. I just took liberties in the cushions. These are very conservative cushions. I just put a lot more. And of the 6 workers we got from Syria to work for me, for my house in Amman, you drive. It's 2 hours drive, so it's not like it's a big deal, you know. And there were 5 Christians and 1 Muslim. This is to endorse what you just said. There was no mix who's who and what is what. Muslim art, or Arab art, was Christians, Muslims, and Jews, if they happened to be there in Syria or Iraq. It was just the tradition and the art of the region, rather than it had the name Muslim art because it was the influence of that period and it came down to us. We are just the heirs of it. So I had this room in my house and I lived in it. But let me just tell you something. When my children grew up, and they had their own homes, I offered them to actually take it. You know, you just can carve it out of the wall and just build it somewhere else. And I'd like to share with you what they told me. They said, Mommy, come on, come clean. How many times anybody sat in these rooms? They are the most uncomfortable things in the world. So the truth is they look pretty. It reminded me of my own nostalgia, but they really are, today, they're not comfortable. They're just very good to look at.
So and we won't spend the night in the bed.
I won't come and sit down on those.
But full of good memories. And I'd like to just point out that you have to put your head up and not to forget to see the ceiling work in these rooms. It's just amazing. Well, I'm going to throw out one question for us to talk about. and then we'll go to questions from you, the audience. But one thing I wanted to ask, where do you think in the Muslim world artists are being nurtured, artists are being encouraged, especially female artists? Is there some place in the Muslim world where there's just astonishing things going on that hasn't come up on the radar of the West yet?
I think I'll start by talking a little bit about this first. Being an artist, especially from North Africa, where until recently there was literally no art scene whatsoever. And then this last 4 years, we probably have tripled the galleries and museums in Morocco when there was none before.
And what do you think was the reason?
First of all, the king is a great patron of the art, and he loves art and he collects art, and therefore a lot of people from Morocco follow his examples, and everybody became very interested. And also the fact that he collects mostly Moroccan art, despite all these art fairs that they start happening in Morocco with all the foreign artists, and it's still the Moroccan art in Morocco is what is most appreciated, and therefore it is nurtured. And this last couple of years, we start having art fairs that didn't exist before. There are about 4 museums about to open this year, between this year and this coming 2 years. And so it was something that is quite unusual for me, having lived in other Arab countries and in the West at the same time, and being exposed to all the museums and the art, to see something happening so fast.
Interesting. What about the internet? Do any of you have any observations about how the internet may be changing the accessibility of art to Arab children, or has it changed, for Arab women artists? Has it helped them? Samina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I, of course, am thinking about Pakistan, in which the boundaries of traditional art and different folk art, what I'm wearing is an example of what women make on a daily basis.
Tell us where it's from.
It's from Swat, up in the north, which is a beleaguered situation with the Taliban, but this kind of work goes on, and I think that it's the great leveler, because whether you're very poor or very rich, the women are always involved in some sort of aesthetic creation, whether it's cooking or making of beautiful objects and textiles, or painting in the way that we understand fine art to be. As far as internet, it hasn't become as ubiquitous as it is here, but I will say that the cell phone is a phenomenon. So everybody in my region has one, and they conduct a lot of their communications and business and ideas through that.
And of course, we haven't talked about it tonight yet, but film is a very important artistic expression in the Muslim world. I mean, Iranians, Egyptians, Syrians particularly have a very, very vivid film scene. Well, is there anybody there brave enough to ask the first question?
Yes, my question is directed at, I'll try to say your name, Lalla Essaydi. It's as close as I can come.
Lalla.
Anyhow, I didn't realize until I saw your work up here tonight that my daughter loves your work and has for a long time, and it was exciting for me to see it here, but I'm wondering if you could tell us where your work is shown, and if it's possible to buy your work.
It's always possible to buy my work. I am represented by Edwin Howe Gallery. That's in Fifth Avenue. And
would you spell the last name?
The name of the gallery?
The name of the gallery, yes.
Edynn, and it's Houk, Houk. And I have few shows going on right now, not in New York. I have one that just opened in Atlanta, another one in Los Angeles. I had a show about 6 months ago here in New York at Edwin Howe Gallery. I'm going to have a mid-career retrospective at the Smithsonian Museum in DC that will open in April. I have another one in Qatar, Doha, the Museum of Orientalism, that both shows are going to be traveling other places, and all kind of information about my shows could be found at the gallery's website.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I have a question for the audience, for the panel. And my experience of Islamic art, and I actually really love your title of Beauty and Belief, because that's what beauty does, it increases belief. With Islamic art, your experience with what we see, the repetition, the geometry, the sense of sameness creating timelessness, so that the now and eternity are connected. How has that been for you in your experience with seeing so much art? And how the inner, the courtyards, being the inner, the zahir and batin, the inner and outer, how do you see that spiritual dimension represented in Islamic art, and how it personally affected you as you were dealing with this medium? So the alchemy of the visual, because that's what art is a reminder of, as in Qawwali. So I just wanted to share
Sabiha,
that.
would you like to give us your thoughts on that?
Some questions hold the answer within them. This is one of them. That's a great question, because it tells me that the last year wasn't wasted at all. Where I've spent it in the batin, really working with the material, interpreting and so on. And really the answer to your question is in the catalog of Beauty and Belief, Crossing Bridges, with the arts of Islamic culture, which will come out in February. Not to be mean, I should answer a little bit the question. That sense of repetition and that sense of, units, which is a kind of tasbih, chanting and so on, is very much within the nature of Islamic art, as you well said. That's why I said your question holds the answer. And Islamic art is an art of contemplation. And to connect with what you just said, that Islamic art is, the one-to-one relationship, I would say it's in the detail, but that what has been interpreted in the West as being, this tendency towards decoration, this over-decorative, this what actually has been termed as horror vacui, literally, fear of the void, which is not quite. Why? Because it's not necessarily fear of the void as much as it is this over-driving passion of this sense of repetition that she just mentioned, which when you look at one object, basically, and the scale is small, just imagine, just take that one little object in the gallery and multiply its size by 100, because in America everything is big. Multiply it by 100, and then look at the detail. Look at the detail, not just of the craftsmanship and the dexterity, but look at the detail that almost makes things invisible to just the human eye. Because Allahu jamilun yuhibbul jamal. God is beautiful and he loves beauty, as the Prophet Muhammad said, which means basically that beauty is not for human eyes alone. It is not just for us as visitors seeing the objects which removed from their context. They are, of course, in display cabinets, etc. But it's also for the eyes of the creator, from whom beauty derives and to whom it returns. And so that is one of the fundamental principles of Islamic art. The rest you'll find in Beauty and Belief catalog.
Yes.
This is for Sabiha, but I'm actually intrigued to hear what all of you have to say in this regard. It's kind of a more specific question, but Sabiha, you said art is a door, and it kind of opens up onto the human experience, so it's universal, and I very much believe that. Do you feel that there are any American artists that you particularly relate to, or can really take visual cues and create a bridge there, or take the human experience and kind of connect them to some of your favorite works in art of the Arab world?
I didn't understand the last part. Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Oh, the last part. Excuse me. Are there any American artists that you really feel are either visually connected or use kind of have a connection through the human experience that you find a bridge between that and some of your favorite pieces and the pieces that you studied in Islamic art?
Yes, absolutely. There are several artists, actually, from Viola to, I mean, there are many artists. I don't want to mention one. And what's the Texan artist that I spoke about? Tom Lee. Tom Lee, whose work I love, who is not necessarily that well known here, but I was struck by a painting of the mountains that completely takes the mountains into, you recognize it's definitely the New Mexico. It's definitely that landscape, and that could not be another landscape. And yet, it opens a space that is totally beyond the local, totally beyond, And I was very struck by Tom Lee's work. He was a war artist in the Second World War, etc. So we're talking back. But there are many artists, and actually, although specialized in Islamic art, I find that myself moved by a lot of work, modern artists, not necessarily just the old stuff, because as I said earlier, I believe that modernity really is timeless. And when you think of the Blue Manuscript that was shown to you just now, that is very modern,
Yes, it is.
There is an abstract quality that is completely,
Very much so.
yeah, absolutely.
Very much so.
And we're talking 10th century. So that timeless modernity connects across time and place the American artists, the Tunisian artists, the artists from Timbuktu in the manuscripts that have been discovered not that long ago and that retell the history of Africa in a different way. So, there is that timeless modernity, I would say, that connects it all.
Okay, this gentleman here.
Thank you again to all our panelists. It was just very intriguing to hear all of you speak. Mike, I have a comment and then a question. I come from a Jordanian-Palestinian household, and my parents are avid art collectors, but I always thought they were very dull. But what intrigued me the most, and as I got older I realized, I opened up my grandmother's closet, and my grandmother's from Jaffa, and her Palestinian embroidered dress, which hers actually dated back to the 1800s. And as I researched it, Palestinian embroidery actually dates back to thousands of years to the region. And I was wondering if there's an interplay between Islamic design and Palestinian embroidery if anyone has any comments or anything to say.
Your
on
Highness, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. Actually, I was planning to comment after you finished talking about it. In Palestine, every village takes pride of having a different stitching. Some of them even colors. Jerusalem, for instance, is white. You can imagine this on white, how beautiful. It's not bridal, it's ceremonial. And every village has a different one. And in the museum in Jordan, if you all come, please, we have that exhibited, antiques, I mean, not new ones, old, but it still goes on, every village. So they take a lot of pride in the local handicraft. Now, where it came from, in Jordan too, of course, the Bedouins, of course, because of the nature of the desert and the heat, they cover it all up and they have a hood. So it just varies according to where you are. In Jerusalem, in the mountains area, it's cool, so you need to have a shawl. So every dress has a shawl. So it is environmental and very, very beautiful and costs very little because it's all done by hand. I think the origin was passed on mother, daughter. So I would say this is the intangible heritage that UNESCO now is going to try to preserve. I really see the link, of course, you're absolutely right. But there is the Silk Route, remember? And so there is so much interplay here. And if you find out where, tell us, because we need to know. Thank you.
And did you learn a lot from your grandmother? Hello? Was your grandmother your muse?
Yes, my grandmother's actually still alive. I believe she's 87, and she's sharper than I am. She's an amazing woman. She's, I think, what inspires me. She was born in...
I was right.
Grandmothers
are muses.
She's awesome. And she's still actually, till this day, stitches her dresses.
Ah, fabulous.
Palestinian women take very great pride in their embroidery.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question. Are we using the word art a little too loosely when we're applying, when we apply it to many of the objects that we see today? Many of them are really at that time. They were really products of workshops, of handicrafts, and they were not considered art at the time they were produced, except for a few, like folios and miniature paintings. Many of these things were not considered art to such an extent that the artists themselves didn't think they were worthy of being signed. So today we consider them art. Should we still use that term?
Well, somebody here can comment on that, but I would just turn it around and say 200 years from now, will they have iPods in art museums?
Well, it's true that the difference is these objects, they've been used as everyday objects. They weren't meant to be hanging on walls like paintings. But again, it's the time, I think. It's like you said, probably what we're using now as a glass of water that you find everywhere in another century is going to be in a museum. And that happened, I think, even in the West. You find all these illuminations from churches that end up in museums, which they're not meant to be art. So I believe that is the same thing. After centuries, it becomes something that is so inaccessible.
Okay, I think Your Highness would like to say something, and then Samina.
This is a very good question. Thank you for that. I'm on board of a museum in Paris called the Museum of Decorative Art. Now, the word decorative art or applied art, this is also done in factories by people for the mass use, like the glasses here at the Met and many things. Although it is applied art and decorative art, today it has this name, like Jeff Koons today. You think he sits and does everyone? He has a lab, and Warhol had a lab, and they were just churning out these things. The beauty about these things is that they're living product. So we take liberty and call them art, but in many years from now, they're going to look back at them and they're going to think, what works? Who's going to do that? So they are art because today they are rare, but they were for living and part of our life. But it's a good question. Yes, where do you draw the line? Mm-hmm. I don't know whether maybe we have one museum here in New York, the Bard, which actually exhibits applied art, things we use in our homes. And I've noticed at the shop here at the Met, the gift shop. We all buy these things which are, you know, a copy of art things, so it's applied art.
So I think Samina also wants to comment? No? Okay. Thank you for putting our conversation on a philosophical level. It's a very good question. Yes, I think we'll have time for one more question.
Thank you. I'm a little bit nervous to speak to such a distinguished panel. That's why I wrote down what I wanted to say. It's not a question, it's a comment. I grew up as a Turkish Muslim woman in Germany, a society that saw Muslim women only as repressed objects who were forced to wear the veil or else had to be rescued to a battered women's shelter. I just want to thank you to bring other images of women to the public and also help me to recover from the alienation that I felt from my own culture because of how I grew up in that society. I encourage the audience to carry forward the stories and images of women like you for many reasons, and one of them is to share my pride of being a creative Muslim woman.
Why, thank you very much. And I think that was a perfect codicil to end our conversation, and I would ask you to please join me in thanking our great panel. Thank you. Thank you all very much.